With great zombie takeout comes great responsibility.
Hello and welcome to Zombie Takeout, the B-movie and cult movie show. I'm John.
And I'm Scotto.
And before we get to this week's movie, we got some news. This is courtesy of Bodo on Twitter. He tweeted us a link to the story. From Bloody Disgusting, George Romero made a movie you've never seen titled The Amusement Park, and you may soon see it. New York Times bestselling author Daniel Kraus announced on Twitter last weekend, and I mean literally last weekend, I adjusted the dates on the story a little bit, that he was watching the, quote, virtually unseen Romero movie, which he's been seeking out for the past 20 years. In a multi-tweet thread, Kraus subsequently called the film a revelation and then called it Romero's most overtly horrifying film. He continued,
Wow.
people who funded it wouldn't allow it, and no wonder it's hellish. In Romero's long career of criticizing American institutions, never was he so merciless. Where can you see this savage masterwork? You can't, but I'm dedicating myself to changing that. Can you help? Yes, probably. Give me some time to figure out what's what. He added, this is truly one of those magical, cursed, in parentheses, objects that I can't believe has fallen through the cinematic cracks. We'll drag it back. He's referring to The Amusement Park, a 60-minute film that Romero shot for television in 1973 that was never released.
He did it for TV?
He did a TV film.
Holy shit.
In the amusement park, an elderly gentleman sets out for what he thinks will be a normal day at an amusement park and is soon embroiled in a walking nightmare, the likes of which you've never seen. Last month, Romero's wife Suzanne teased that a film Romero shot in 1973 was going to be restored and released for all the world to see. She said, quote, we're going to restore it. We're going to show it to the Romero cinephiles. It's a scary movie, but it's not a horror movie. And it's about ageism. Anyway,
oh wow,
he has a cameo in it, which he did in most of his films, and it'll be fun. We'll show the movie. We'll get it distributed. It'll be a project for the foundation's going to do. So a thoroughly terrifying movie that's not necessarily a horror film and is about ageism.
Ageism in 1973. I mean, I guess it was kind of an issue. We saw some of it in, the Walter Matthau
right?
movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Sunshine Place, yeah.
Yeah.
And before Romero was all that old, when I got to ageism, even just now reading it, I thought, wait, when was it made? Thinking it was more recent, when he got older, but no, that was 1973, around the same time as Martin.
Oh, right.
And he was only in his 40s, I think at that point. At least that's what I looked in the movie.
But can we get the Jerry Lewis clown concentration camp movie?
When
get that?
When I saw that line about it being a magical curse object, I immediately thought of that movie.
Oh, someday we're going to see that in all its glory.
As far as I know, never finished.
It's going to have midnight showings and...
Blanking on the name of it offhand. The clown.
It's like the clown.
The day the clown died. The day the clown cried, if I recall correctly.
It's a very solid title for a movie too, of course. What the fuck?
And one more thing before we get to the movie. Just an announcement. The usual. Before I announce what it is. Before I get to that part. On Thursday, this coming Thursday, Thanksgiving here in the U.S. The 23rd, the 22nd, the new season of Mystery Science Theater will be premiering on Netflix. And usually on Thanksgiving, they've been doing, for the last several years, a Turkey Day marathon. They do 6 episodes of the classic series on Thanksgiving. They're not doing that on Thanksgiving because they don't want to compete with themselves. So the Turkey Day marathon has been moved to this coming Sunday, the 18th. Starting at noon, you can go to shoutfactorytvlive.com for more information. It's usually on the Shout Factory YouTube channel and the MST3K YouTube channel, probably Shout Factory's Twitch channel. Lots of places to watch it online. But yeah, it's 6 hours on MST3K with interstitials that are, that they've just recently, Joel and probably Joan is going to show up. Felicia have recently shot. So,
It's kind of tough that they would pick the day that they normally did something else on as their premiere day.
well, but Thanksgiving has been, I mean, they've been doing this since the original series. They've
Well,
done
right,
Thanksgiving
right.
marathon.
It's tough that they would pick that as their premiere day, though.
Well, because it's practically a second holiday for MST3K fans. So it
Yeah.
does feel like an appropriate day to launch a new season. And it means I can, on I think it'll allow a lot more people to watch the marathon, having it on the previous Sunday instead of on a holiday when most people, are with their families and
They
not
could have
watching
just
TV.
included it with the marathon, actually. I
Yeah,
don't know.
and the marathon to me is, and full disclosure, I usually stay home on Thanksgiving and watch the
Yeah.
marathon. I'm vegetarians and atheist, so Thanksgiving doesn't really mean a lot to me. Um, so I usually stay home and watch the marathon, and it's kind of an event. I mean, I'm glad they didn't just cancel it. Um,
Yeah.
Whereas a new season isn't really an event because I can watch the new season whenever.
How do you fit that and Thanksgiving, though, in the same
Well,
day?
Thanksgiving is usually. I tried doing that a couple of times on the same day. Didn't really work. I do Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving Eve.
Okay.
Yeah, because the both on the same day never really didn't really work. And I usually opted for MSD3K.
Right.
Anyway, on to finally this week's movie from 2011 with great power, the Stan Lee story. Of course, this is a tribute to the late great, and I always say late great. I've never meant great more seriously than this time.
Yeah.
Stan Lee, who passed away a couple of days ago on Monday, the 12th. And of course, that brings us to the impromptu plot summary, sponsored by the Daily Beagle, New York's most trusted newspaper since 1898.
And also brought to you by the 1950s, the golden age of America. Point the finger at the comic books while the military industrial complex takes power.
Yeah, the Comics Code. Really, I think the first of the great moral panics.
I'm watching that going, I had just, wow. Really?
This is your first
That?
exposure to the Comics Code. Wow.
How, I kind of saw it. I knew it was a thing, but I didn't know exactly how it began
Mhm.
and the bullshit that
Oh yeah,
was used to. Oof, wow.
comics
Anyway,
and comics, D&D, rock, metal. All the things.
well, also because you get McCarthy at the same
Oh yeah,
time,
yeah.
and that's really the main focus of the 50s, were that they were, stifling.
That's a good point. That's probably why it was the first moral panic because McCarthy started all that shit.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So how do we do an impromptu plot summary for the life of Stan Lee?
good point. Well, well, I mean, that's a good. How do you do that on a lot for a biography for eventually a biography?
All
Um,
right, so I'll just, hit
yeah.
like a little bit of
Mhm.
his life. Let me think about this. I love the way he starts. He takes an ad. He's just trying to make money. That's the deal. He's a kid. It's the depression.
I think at
He
that
had.
point, I think at the key point, he was married and trying to support a family.
Oh, I think. Well,
But he
what
said he got
happened was,
family.
from what I understand, remember he was taking all sorts of jobs. He'd been working since he was a
Mhm.
kid,
Oh yeah,
and I think it was something about writing, like a management position of some sort.
magazine management. I want to say it was
Yeah.
nothing to do with with magazines, and he
So
wanted to be a novelist. So
it was very poorly worded, the ad that he answered, and it turns out to be, these two comic book guys that was the comic book department of the publishing company. And so he's pretty much, fetching, a guy Friday, I guess you could say, or whatever,
and the two guys were Simon and Kirby.
yeah. And they had this they had to have 2 pages of written text as a requirement to get second class postage. So they decided, you can write it. And being the kid, of course, he took the job very seriously and wrote, whatever, he could think of,
It was a Captain America comic. He had these 2 pages. The first thing he had published.
right, right. So he was now published, and well, when the time came, uh, Kirby and
Simon was his last name. I can't remember his first name. Last name.
Yeah. Well, anyway, they decide to move on, and he's the only one left in the whole
Yeah.
comic department. So they decide, ah, why don't you run it? They didn't, of course, give a shit about comics or
Right.
anything back then. So,
This was when it was Timely Comics, by the way.
oh, right, right. So you could almost say hilarity ensues at this point because I mean, he starts, you know, managing writing comics.
That was the beginning of. I mean, it wasn't Marvel yet, but that was the beginning of his career in comics.
He assembles the band. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, they of course just do shit that no one had thought of doing for comics, and well, you know, eventually becomes the multi-billion-dollar empire
Yeah.
that we see before us right now. That he left. Hilarity
And then
ensues.
somehow went bankrupt in the 90s. I forgot about that.
I forgot about that too, but well, it was because there was some graft involved, I
Okay,
think.
exactly. Yeah, he wasn't a businessman. That was hit home rather thoroughly. Um,
Right.
and the first person they talked to in the documentary, and I don't know if this terrified you as much as it did me, Nick Cage.
Yes. Why Nicolas Cage? Like, I mean, I didn't even think Ghost Rider was a Stanley property.
It was Marvel, but I don't think it was Stan.
Yeah, right. So it was very
Yeah, an odd
shoehorned in
choice.
there.
And I'd forgotten about that he was in Ghost Rider. I didn't know what his connection was. I thought maybe he was just a fan, but yeah. But there's a quote early on in the film. I wish I knew who said it. They didn't have credits on at the time. Stan was really the first comic book writer to make the human being behind the mask more important than the mask itself. And that is his major contribution.
Right. That is why the Marvel universe is destroying the DC one
Yeah, yeah.
at pretty much every turn.
And there were a lot of people talking about how they relate to Stan's characters, particularly Peter Parker. And even for me, I mean, I am morbidly arachnophobic, but ever since I was a kid, Spider-Man has been my absolute favorite superhero because I relate to Peter Parker.
Although you could say Batman is about the tragedy
Yeah,
and why a guy does it.
but Batman still was, and he was. I mean, and I'm not actually curious. I meant to look into this. If Batman was the Dark Knight in the 50s, or was
Um,
he more of a archetype? Even as the Dark Knight, he's still an archetype.
yeah,
He wasn't. He was Batman slash Bruce Wayne has never been human. You know, Superman is all about the archetype. You know, the DC. That's why they involve gods a lot because those
well,
characters
right.
are archetypes. The difference with Marvel is they're humans.
Well, Batman's kind of the detective, you know.
Yeah, yeah, true.
That's why I fit into the detective comics,
Yeah. And I like Batman. Don't get me wrong, but it's they're and they both have their place. There's certainly a place for archetypes, but the reason DC, I think DC's killing it because they just make better movies. Frankly,
You mean
um,
Marvel?
sorry, Marvel. Yeah, Marvel just makes better movies
I
on
was gonna say,
average. Yeah,
don't.
flip that, reverse it. Marvel just makes better movies on average. Although also again on average, DC's animation far better than Marvel's. Um, but it just came down to Peter Parker again. Getting back to that, he was just a normal guy who happened to have superpowers
Yeah,
and worried about normal person stuff, and that was that. And not just in comics. I think in genre fiction as a whole, that was Stan Lee's great contribution because it influenced Star Wars.
right.
You know, it influenced so much. Look at science fiction before that moment. It was about archetypes and effects and cool visuals.
Yeah,
You know, it wasn't about people. I honestly think Stan Lee was the one who really introduced that whole idea that genre fiction can be human.
you're right. If you see which sci-fi movie did we do? Was it the day the not the day the Earth stood still? The
That
other
was on
one.
before.
The other one where they were out in space on the oh man, Forbidden Planet.
Forbidden Planet was the two-parter, but that was still in the 50s. Yeah, they landed
Eh,
on the planet. Yeah,
Right.
impressive.
Just the whole crazy. Was that the one Leslie Nielsen
Yes, yes,
or
Forbidden Planet. You're right. Right.
yeah. So right, those characters were just ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, it was all just gleaming. You know, we're
And,
here to save the day, kind of
and
thing.
particularly Forbidden Planet is because Day of the Earth still was a little bit ahead of its time, which is why I
Oh,
like
right.
it so
Daily
much.
it's still completely different.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that
Um,
was very humanist,
yeah. But yeah, Forbidden Planet was fun, and visually, even now, it's really impressive. At the time, it was probably mind blowing.
but it was
But
ridiculous.
yeah, but there was no story. There was nothing human about it. And really, comics have become mythology in a sense.
Oh, definitely, easily. Right.
And then
I
all,
mean,
and not just comics, genre fiction in general. I mean, Star Wars is mythology too.
of
It's
course.
become the modern mythology, and Stan Lee was a huge influence on that.
I mean, we're Star Trek too.
Yeah,
But of course, they're all the
and
qualities are because they've examined the human
right.
condition.
Although, if you really look at it, and I think I just realized why I've always been more on the Star. I mean, I like Trek, but I'm always been more on the Star Wars side, and I like some DC stuff, but I'm always more on the Marvel side. Really, Star Wars is more Marvel. Trek is more DC. Trek is more the Dirk Strongjaw, you know, idealistic view.
I mean, I think they've broken away from that.
They have,
Well,
particularly the first season of Discovery.
oh yeah. Well, even like Enterprise and
Yeah,
Deep
yeah.
Space Nine have been just about. It's been about humans dealing with those
Mhm.
conditions.
But it's
It's. I think it's quite the opposite of what Stanley has done because, of course, everything he's done takes place in things that he
well, yeah.
knows in our
Yeah,
surroundings
he
and
also, as the one who decided to put everything in a shared universe, and even put most of it in New York, because he's in
yeah,
New York. And that's been very influential to a lot of writers who have, shared universes where all their books take place in the same universe.
Kevin Smith.
And David Mitchell, my hero, it's
Yeah,
all of his books are in the same universe. There's a lot of crossover, and I think in terms of large multi-character franchises, multi-title franchises, Stan Lee was really the first one to say put it all together, and that, I mean, let's face facts, that was a marketing decision
yeah,
because it allowed easy crossovers, which sold more books.
right.
But I think there's a scene in the movie where he's reluctant to dance with his wife because she's a much better dancer than he is. And I think that really kind of was an interesting bit of irony because he made his name by creating these superheroes that had flaws, but he wanted to maintain his legend.
I mean, oh man, yeah, his wife just passed like not that long
A
ago
year
either.
ago. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I mean, this is of course sad and you heartbreaking in a lot of ways, particularly because he's such an icon. But I don't want to hear anybody say you didn't see this coming. He was
Eh,
95 and his wife passed last year. I mean, it was
right.
inevitable.
As soon as I saw that his wife had passed last year, it is kind of a way a lot of
Yeah.
couples tend to go. Like,
I had been kind of in the back of my head, but as soon as I saw that, back of my head, thinking about a tribute last year, and I just never quite settled on anything because I didn't know this movie existed until 2 days ago when you said, "What are we going to do?" And I googled Stanley documentary and found it.
yeah, forgive us because of course this is probably one of the most thrown together episodes we've ever done, right? Like we've never done just like pick a movie on Monday and
Yeah.
like fuck it, let's do this.
There's also in this movie a lot of great footage and a lot of great history of Marvel, which I didn't know. I didn't know it started as Timely, and of how a lot of that all worked. There's also some great footage of the original Marvel bullpen,
Yeah.
where you've got Kirby and Ditko and Lee and all of these legends working together. Um,
Yeah. I've heard people trying to talk shit about Lee not
I'm
taking
glad you
credit.
I'm glad you segued into that. Because there is a lot of criticism of Lee stealing credit and not trying to get more money than he really deserved and build his legacy more. And Lee really it was all about his legacy and his image.
Yeah.
And there is some validity to that. And he himself admitted it later in the film. I
But
kind of
no
felt
one
like he
gave a
glossed
fuck
over a lot
about
of that.
comics back then.
Well, true,
They
true.
didn't they didn't bother putting credits on them until Lee,
Mhm.
did that.
Yeah, yeah.
But people at first were like, why are you taking credit for this comic book? I mean, come on. The story Lee conveyed about not even talking about being in comics or having to like get it out of him for years, that's how he
He
was
would
in
just say he's
life.
a writer, and then he would say he writes children's stories, and then if they pressed him further, he would say he wrote comics.
Right. It just wasn't seen upon, looked upon as like something valid that you would get credit for,
Yeah.
or be really angling for credit for. But of course, they didn't know it was a multi-billion-dollar industry, potentially.
And a lot of that comes from initially Jack Kirby, who he co-created Spider-Man and Iron Man and a lot of the Thor, or not Thor, Hulk, possibly Thor too. Who was his first collaborator. Kirby was the artist, Lee was the writer. And from what I understand, Kirby just hated him in general. He was
Yeah.
really annoyed by Lee. He said Lee liked to irritate people. He just liked to irk people, which I can see. He's kind of that kind of trickster personality.
But the other thing, this shit would have died back in the 60s
Oh yeah, yeah.
had Lee not pushed on.
Lee is
When
the
they,
one who aged up comics. Actually, it was his wife's idea.
yeah,
She told him right, which it was when the comics code was happening, and he was at a loss of what they could do because they tried playing along and doing these very kid friendly, boring titles, and his
right,
wife told him just write what you want to write, and
right.
that was when comics grew up.
So everyone else had gotten laid off, though, too. So if Lee hadn't done that, I mean, it probably would have died as a genre
Yeah.
for a
And
time.
and I think if Lee hadn't done that, a lot of and I know you hate this phrase, and I don't want to get into the debate now, but a lot of geek culture wouldn't exist. A lot of
Well,
the media that a lot of geek media
yeah,
who that adult geeks love, Firefly, Star Wars, a lot of the modern comics. This stuff wouldn't exist. That stuff would still be considered, the Vonnegut has a great line about science fiction being in the circular file. A lot of that stuff would still be disparaged and looked down on. You wouldn't have this huge industry around
Lucas
all of that.
really. Yeah, honestly, it's Lucas that made it the
Lucas
industry.
Lucas took it to that level, but Lee
Right.
set the groundwork for that
Well, right.
by aging up his comics.
Lee influenced Lucas in that way to write that, but everybody thought Lucas was insane.
True.
He could have done it. He was working on Apocalypse Now, and instead said, "You know what? If I can't do this in Vietnam like I want to do it, I'm just going to do this, this science fiction, space opera thing that I've been working on."
Yeah.
And then everyone's like, "You're going to fucking do a kids movie? You could do this great Vietnam movie, and you're just going to do a kids movie?" All of them were telling him that,
Mhm.
and of course, he went on with the
Well, yeah.
merchandising aspect, and that opened up a lot of bean counters' eyes. That like,
Oh, yeah.
whoa, you can make money doing
I
this.
think that's why if he hadn't done the figures, and I think the figures were the big push merchandising was. I don't know if there would have been an empire if he hadn't come up with the idea to sell action figures.
Well, yeah, who knows?
But anyway, but yeah, there was a lot of there were a number of people criticizing him for credit and saying he stole credit. And I feel like the movie could have done a little bit more with that. It's a bit of a puff piece.
Right. But I mean, without him, there
Oh
was no
yeah.
credit to get.
I'm
This is my point.
Yeah,
It
fair point.
doesn't matter.
The analogy I came up with, Lee is like Steve Jobs.
I'd say he's even more. I mean, I wouldn't downplay him that much.
Well, in the sense that Jobs was the marketer.
Exactly.
Jobs was the idea guy and the marketer and the
There's
face.
so many people that probably like spewed their coffee when I said that.
I'm not getting back to back. I am a Mac user. You're a Windows user. But no, Jobs was the face and
Right.
the image and
He
the idea
didn't make
guy
shit though.
and
I
the
mean, come on,
marketer.
let's be honest.
Yeah, and a lot more people know about him than know about Steve Wozniak,
I mean, how many
who
times I
actually
laugh
did
at
the inventing.
right? Every time I laugh at a Mac commercial, like, "Oh, what great innovation! You put it in a different color."
But Stanley was the face, was the marketer,
Yeah,
was the one who
yeah.
knew how to sell it. Nobody knows about, or very unless you really know comics, you've never heard of Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko.
But I mean, it's a bad analogy because Lee actually did writing and
There's
developed
some question about that. There's
the
people saying he didn't.
stories.
There are people saying he didn't do nearly as much writing as he's credited.
But he at least did some.
Kirby,
I'm saying.
well, Jobs had the ideas. I mean, he didn't know. He didn't. I don't know how much actual inventing he did, technical work he did. But anyway,
Not really.
but then there is a lot of question about how much Lee wrote. Kirby said he doesn't remember him writing anything.
Really?
But moving away from that angle, there was a whole section about the comics code, which I love.
Yeah.
Because the comics code was the first moral panic. And there was a great line. Comic books gave parents an easy answer, which is a great analysis of every moral panic.
Right.
It was an easy answer. D&D is satanic was an easy answer. Heavy metal is killing your kids and driving them to alcoholism was an easy answer. And whatever other moral panics I'm forgetting about. And I also was very surprised because I did a little checking. He started working for Timely Comics. I never knew that became Marvel.
Yeah, I don't think I was very familiar with Timely either.
I had no idea. But I love the line, we try to write stories that we would enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think that for any creative person, that is the key. Is create what you like. Please yourself, and then other people will probably like it. Don't try to please an audience. So many great creations, things that I love, were created that way. Marvel, Avatar: The Last Airbender. They didn't make it for adults. They didn't make it for kids. Looney Tunes. They've said they didn't make it for adults. They didn't make it for kids. They made it for themselves.
Yeah.
I think that's a big key to creating great art. And I also realized he added slice of life to superheroes. They were talking about the Fantastic Four, and there was a ton of slice of life in the Fantastic Four.
I don't think I knew that he added them getting evicted and trying to make the bills.
And there was, Fantastic Four was one that I never really got into.
Yeah.
Speaking of, and just a diversion from the movie itself. In addition to I've always loved Superman or Spider-Man rather. Also, and this didn't happen until the 90s. Professor X was the first powerful disabled character I ever saw in media.
I think you're right. I can't think of another one.
I'd seen, in the 70s when I was a kid, there was a push to bringing in, there was a lot of, there was a push for inclusion in a lot of media in the late 70s and early 80s.
Yeah.
But, for some reason, X-Men was never on my radar until the Fox animated series in the 90s. I have kind of an on-again, off-again relationship with comics. I get really into them for short periods of time, and then I lose interest. But I have watched cartoons / animation / anime all since I was a kid up until now. And it was in the 90s when Fox started the X-Men series. The first time I'd ever heard of X-Men, I saw a powerful disabled character, and it blew my mind. That was Stan Lee. And they covered the creation of the Hulk and Spider-Man, which I loved. But I wish they had they covered a bit of X-Men and the civil rights, the background of the civil rights movement that inspired it. But
they talk about Black Panther, did they?
Black Panther and Falcon as well, but he never.
They mentioned Black Panther, but they didn't say how he came up with that.
Well, it was during the civil rights movement, and Stan was all about inclusion. But he didn't cover why he decided to put Professor X in a wheelchair. I would have liked to have known that. But with regard to the Hulk, Ferrigno's description of the Hulk really did sound like Frankenstein.
Yeah, and the first early drawings of the Hulk looked like Frankenstein as well.
And Stan Lee said that he wanted to combine Frankenstein with Jekyll and Hyde.
Jekyll and Hyde, yeah.
And also work in a lot of science fiction angles because that was becoming very popular. And
I'm surprised they didn't talk about the series Incredible Hulk, because that actually lasted as opposed to the live action Spider-Man, which is horrendous.
I'm so glad they talked about the live action Spider-Man though, because I have very fond memories of that. And I've recently watched it on YouTube, and it was hilariously bad. But yeah, the 70s Bill Bixby series of the Hulk, I wish they'd gotten into it. The fact that Lou Ferrigno was in the documentary is really all they said about that.
Yeah.
Incidentally, some of the interviews were done up to 4 years before the movie was released.
Wow.
McFarlane said he was 46. He's 57 now, which means it was 11 years ago. The movie came out in 2011. So yeah, it took him a while to do this.
I love the John Voight scene towards the end.
Yeah, and I was glad to see a clip of Corman's Fantastic Four. Although, even though I liked Raimi's Spider-Man, they kind of made it out that that was the first good superhero movie, completely overlooking Burton's Batmans. The first two, the Burton ones.
The first one, because I mean the second one.
Uh, well, yeah, they were a step above what we had for comic books movies at the time.
And it's true that Burton's first Batman is what brought Lee's work to the film finally. Like they didn't
Yeah,
start talking about Cameron doing Spider-Man
right.
until after that summer of
Yeah.
'89, where
Was it
Batman.
was Cameron going to do it at first?
Yeah,
Okay, I
originally.
forgot that part.
So right, that we'd heard that like by the end of the summer of '89, like they're gonna get Cameron to do, Spider-Man, and
Mhm.
everyone's like, "Holy shit, that's gonna be great!" And of course, we had to wait like what,
Yeah,
12 years.
right. I do remember in the mid '90s getting the first casting news about the X-Men movie, and just being incredibly nervous about it, though,
Oh yeah,
because that obviously to me was a very special property. They really had to do it right. I remember Glenn Danzig's name being thrown around for Wolverine. I'm so glad they found Hugh Jackman.
Glenn Danzig, Glenn Danzig acting that
Well,
that
visually he fits the part. Visually he is perfect for Wolverine, but yeah, he's not right for the character. But even looking back on the first X-Men movie and even Burton's Batman movies, they were a cut above what we had, but
yeah.
they were still kind of cheesy. They also mentioned the Fantastic Four movies, which were hideous.
I mean, the first Burton Batman, though, if you think about all we had
Yeah,
before that,
it was a big step up, but in hindsight, it was still kind of cheesy if you look back.
I mean, if you're talking about Adam West before that,
Yeah, right.
that's a
Um,
huge leap.
yeah, right. Well, especially for Batman, but I think just in comics in general, Burton's Batman was the first at the time good comics movie.
Right. And
Um,
again, it showed that there's money to be made here.
right. I kind of winced when Stan was talking about, he always wanted to be an actor initially,
Mhm.
before he realized he couldn't act and started writing.
Yeah.
Um, and he was talking about how glad he is to have roles in movies now, and particularly good movies. And the first two they show clips of after he says good movies are X-Men Last Stand and the Fantastic Four. Notoriously bad Marvel movies. And by Marvel, I mean the company Marvel, they were created by Marvel, not the Marvel, not MCU, before anybody
Yeah.
corrects that. They're not MCU. Um, Incidentally, I checked IMDb, and Stan's last acting appearance is in a movie called Madness in the Method, it hasn't come out yet. It was directed by Jason Mewes and stars him as himself.
Oh shit.
That's Stan's last acting job.
I thought I don't know when the next Avengers is due out.
According to IMDb, he's done with his appearances in the MCU. There's no more cameos planned for the MCU.
I thought there was one
Um,
last one.
although I don't recall if the second Ant-Man movie has come out. I've kind of ignored those movies. I'm not a Paul Rudd
Yeah.
fan. And I'm pretty sure Captain Marvel has already been shot, so I wouldn't be surprised if he was in that. And that's coming out next year, I think.
I'm so when I say like the next Avengers movie, I mean for all I know it could be out within the next few weeks because it's just there.
Well,
There's
no.
just one out. We've gone from like, oh, we gotta wait like all this time for the next one to, oh look, it's been 2 weeks. Here's another one.
Ant-Man and Wasp, I think, is already out. I'm not 100% sure. I think that was this year. Next one is going to be
Yeah,
Captain Marvel, which is next year.
I thought there was like an origin story for Wasp.
Well, that was the first. I think that's maybe the Ant-Man and the Wasp. Because I don't know if she was in. Like I said, I watched the cutscene. That's all. because I just can't deal with Paul Rudd. I did kind of get a kick out of Stan saying how Kirby was one of the nicest and most cooperative people, yet Kirby fucking hated him. And then they talked about Stanley Productions, which was the company he was founded or was involved with after Marvel went bankrupt. And I kind of thought it was quaint when they were talking about making interactive media in '99.
Oh yeah. I mean that's what everybody was pushing towards, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he was a bit ahead of the time
Oh
too.
yeah,
So
and of course that company folded. That's when they said he was not at all a businessman. He was a pure creative, which is why he ended up allowing people to take advantage of him financially a few times. And then he founded POW. I can't remember what POW stood for. But and then there was World of Heroes. I think was it World of Heroes was another online channel that he founded. Um, and his last line to camera in the movie. The only problem is time. I just wish there was more time. And this
yeah.
movie came out. This was not posthumously made because he died
Well,
two
right.
days ago. This
All
came out in
right.
2011. I mean, he was up there, but nobody was thinking about him dying yet. But that was his last line to camera.
Well, I mean, he was probably thinking about it back then because I mean, he was in his 80s back
Oh yeah,
then.
true, true. Um, but
Who do? I mean, who wouldn't want to go till 95 though, you know?
oh,
I
of
mean,
course, of course. And just create the legend. Well, I mean, putting aside what he actually contributed to the world, which is huge, but just the legend he was.
yeah.
He maybe he didn't maybe not didn't have a head for business in terms of money, but the man knew how to market. He knew how to sell
And
shit.
the relationship he had with his wife is just priceless. I
Uh-huh.
mean, they are just an old married couple. What was it, 70 years?
Yeah, exactly
The
70 years. I
fuck
checked the dates. They
the fuck does
married
that in Hollywood? But I
they
mean, it's
married
just
in 47. She died in 17.
oh man.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know to the day, but yeah, in terms of years, exactly 70 years. Um, but just I didn't really think about it until watching the movie today. That idea of humanizing heroes in genre fiction was so huge. I mean, and that was nobody's questioning that. That was definitely his.
Yeah.
I mean, just for myself, the two novel ideas, the one I'm currently writing and the one I have that planned next, completely based in that idea. I'm twisting the hero's journey to make it a more realistic, modern
A more
hero's journey.
human
Yeah,
experience.
and that is I didn't do it intentionally, but that is straight from Stanley.
Yeah.
And my next one is about a city with superheroes, but from the perspective of the people living in the city, which is totally a Stanley influenced idea. He was, he forever changed genre fiction through comics, which I think too, still a lot of people are looked down on.
Well, I think he saved the genre altogether. I mean,
Yeah.
the
Oh, he
medium
saved comics
altogether.
in general.
Yeah.
He was the one, and again, his wife with an assist from his wife was the one who came up with the idea to age comics up, which
Yeah.
is what made them survive. And I think again made genre fiction survive because it grew up and became quality. The reason we have an MCU and any science fiction that adults want to watch or fantasy is because of him. I mean, you could say Tolkien did it with fantasy.
Yeah.
There was adult fantasy before this, but it was on the page. And there was adult science fiction, but it was on the page. It wasn't popular media. Comics, I think, um, led the way to movies that were intended for an older audience in the genre, in
I
speculative fiction.
mean, it should be a good gateway. I don't know about how long you want to stay in it, but it should lead to Tolkien and
Oh, of course.
Herbert.
And I think there's great comic stories. God Loves, Man Kills, one of the X-Men stories, which is an absolute masterpiece. Highly recommend it. A very mature adult story. So there's a lot of great adult storylines and the characters in comics now, and that all came from Stan. Anyway, obviously sequels and remakes not a thing. Um,
There will never be another Stanley.
Absolutely. For better and worse. On the brains.
On the brains. I don't know. Do we really rate this with brains?
I mean,
But I guess we could.
I mean, in terms of the how it covered its subject matter, we've done documentaries before.
True.
Um, and I think again, I would have liked to have seen a little more nuance in the controversy about how much he actually wrote, and a lot of that, and the credit issue. It was covered, but I think it could have been done better. But overall, I loved it, and I'm going for. I still have to recommend it.
Yeah, I'll go 4.5. I loved the human story to it, and yeah, just seeing him interact with his wife throughout, I think could be worth seeing this alone. And some of the people interacting with him of
Yeah.
just like, like I said, John Voight,
Yeah,
just a guy
and
you would not associate with this.
right at all. And just in Stan's, just to defend Stan a little bit because I've been pushing that credit issue. According to everybody I've seen or heard from who met him and who knew him, he was a very very nice, generous, kind guy. He was a wonderful person. There was just that issue of credit, or
Yeah,
some issues or money. He just had some issues when money got involved. So
he was still creative long after the other people claiming
sure,
that they were
sure,
creative were long gone.
fair point.
So fuck
Uh,
those guys.
all right. So what have we learned?
We all need more time.
Yes, yes. And I mean, I was gonna go with the cliche, but I'll actually have a real one. I learned how Marvel came about and how Spider-Man, my favorite superhero, and the Hulk, I mean, who I also really relate to, came about. That was very educational. All right, that's it for With Great Power, the Stan Lee story. Until next time, we will be reviewing Demolition Man. Yes, we're gonna push the gang.
Fuck.
We're gonna push the gang couldn't shoot straight back a week till the middle one of December. We're taking 2 weeks off, so we'll be back in 3 weeks for Thanksgiving, and then you've got some stuff coming up the following
Yeah.
week, including the screening for Neil Breen's next movie.
Oh,
So
that's right.
can't wait to hear about that.
I've got to go to
Um,
that.
but we promised Bodo that Demolition Man would be the first movie in December, so that's got to be next. Then we'll do the gang who couldn't shoot straight, and we'll close the year with the Star Wars Holiday Special. I think we announced that. Yeah.
To at least find out what the shell does.
Until then, of course, always remember, never forget, wherever you go in life, there you are.
There you are.
Rest in peace, Generalissimo, and thank you so much.